Hi and welcome. I'm down here in my wormery and I've already got one of my worm bins out here on the bench ready to feed. But what I've got here is actually the food that I imagined for two systems. So not only are we feeding the one that's already out here on the bench, but I've got another one that we're going to be feeding today. It's two systems that I've now started treating as a match set, sort of a paired up buddy system arrangement between these two bins. We're going to feed the older one first. It's the 76-day-old system. 7 feedings so far, and off on the edge you can see a little number that I scribbled in there. It's the estimated number of worms that we think live in here. 829. Sorry, I couldn't tell which way was up there for a second. And the other bin that we're going to feed is my original population of worms. Slightly younger bin, 58 days of age, only fed 4 times, but a larger population. Oh, once again, turning it the wrong direction. Over 1,200 thought to live in that one. Or at least that's what we thought lived in there when we first started. So over 800 when we first started in here, or at least that was our best estimate. So I'm going to try to divvy up this food portion in such a way that seems fair for that estimated number of worms in the two systems. Perhaps leaving a little bit extra, or feeding a little bit less here and leaving a little bit more for the other system, the second system that we're going to feed, that's thought to have possibly a few extra worms in it. And this thing is what we're going to be using to mark where we last fed. We've got no real reason to switch what we've been doing so far, so we'll just stick to feeding down the middle like we've been doing lately. So let's just take a quick look through here and see how that last feeding is coming along. Both bins had leftover avocado. One of the bins, maybe this one I think, might have had a leftover pear. And then both bins were given celery and the stems of some grapes last time. So after 9 days, I'm curious to see how the celery may have broken down. I'm just wondering if we're going to see like long strands or fibers of the celery. I would think that that's probably all that would be remaining of it, if anything. So as I start bumping into stuff like avocado pits, they've been in here long enough that they make me wonder if I could start breaking them up, and it seems like I can. And if you've ever handled one of these things when it's still fresh, it's usually very difficult to do this sort of thing to it. Very tough material, but I figured let's give it a little hand there, help it out. And here is half of an avocado, possibly where that pit came from. So now we're just really starting to find leftovers. This here, okay. This is the stem of a grape, so I don't know if it's visible on the camera. But somehow the castings always get caught up in between the branches of one of these things, making me assume that the worms really like cruising around inside of it and through it and rubbing up against it. And actually, if you look carefully, you can actually see worms hanging out down right in the middle of the thing. Little ones, big ones, sprawled out, kind of scratching their backs on this rough branch. And I think there may have been other avocado leftovers. I forget which system. One of the systems had 2 and the other one had only 1. Here's another. We had 2 pieces of grape stem in here, and the other system I think we just threw 1 large one in here. We put 2 small ones together. So here again, it's just interesting how the castings all seem like they've been jammed in between all the branches of something like this, indicating the worms have been just cruising right through it. So I don't see anything that resembles leftovers of the celery though. Nope. Here's another piece of the avocado. They're still working out the soft material within the shell, and I guess at the same time they're probably working the shell itself down a little bit as well. So these are thought to be red wiggler worms. These were probably sourced out of one of my retired versions of my outdoor worm bag. Because unless I've marked off one of my worm systems as being the original population of red wigglers that I started out with, which is what we're going to be feeding in the second bin, then I always assume that any other red wigglers other than those that are always specifically labeled as being such, as what they are, any other red wigglers in my systems are probably ones that I sourced from outside and then kind of brought them in gradually from outside. So we've got a pretty good sized pit that we could drop today's feeding into. And then as we fill this hole in later, we'll probably just take a little glance around the outer edges of the system to see how things are progressing on the outer edges too. I'm always curious to see how things look out there. So I don't remember how many sheets this size I prepared per bin, but I think it was at least 5 or 6. So we'll just drop a few of them down here into the feeding area right below where we're going to be putting the food. What do we got left? I've got one more remaining. You know, we'll save this last one as sort of a top covering almost. Try to cap off our feeding in a way at the end. So I think it's time to start bringing in the food. So each one's going to get half of a cucumber. Nice juicy morsel of food right there. And then I think, you know, like we said, I think the next bin that we're feeding has probably got a slightly larger population in it. So let me see if I can grab something that resembles about one handful here and then compare it to what remains. That's another handful, or possibly a slightly larger handful. I'm going to take what's down in here and sort of divvy that up into about half. And I believe we've given a fair split based on what we expect the number of worms in each system to be. And we'll even top off the feeding with a little bit of this crushed eggshell. A little something to help them break down their food. Alright, not only that, but I get to wipe off all this juicy cucumber and lettuce juice off my glove so that it can go right down in here where the worms can take better advantage of it than I can. And with that, we're ringing the dinner bell for these little guys. I don't know, we got to get these leftovers back in here too before we close up shop down here. Sometimes I'll alternate the feeding location in my bins, go from spot to spot, maybe go from side to side, and in the past I've even gone from corner to corner to corner, going around and around the system, feeding in different locations all the time. And I don't know, for now we just recently got these two systems paired together as a match set, and we haven't even really given much thought to any sort of experimentation we could do. Maybe it's just at first a good idea to make sure we've got them both sort of humming along at a equal pace, and then maybe we can start thinking about doing something like that. But for now, I guess we're going to stick to the status quo and just feed down the middle like we've been doing. And I guess we'll also use this as an opportunity to take a quick peek out on these far edges furthest away from where the feedings have been occurring. I don't know. I always feel like part of me feeding down the middle consistently also should, in a way, consist of me moving older stuff that flanks both sides of the feeding area. Kind of keep moving that stuff outwards in a way. To always make room for the new stuff coming back down in the middle the next time. So, I'm trying to remember which system it was. I think it was actually the other system. You know, the system with the original worms in it, the one that we're going to feed next. I think that one we had sort of observed how maybe the moisture level in there was a bit lacking, or at least we put it on watch, and I think we might have even dampened it. I don't remember. Or maybe we just took it on fate that the dampness of the food we were adding was going to be sufficient. I don't know. But here I just wondered if moisture-wise we're doing okay. I think we are. It feels pretty good. You can see the moisture on my hands as I kind of plow through stuff. Nothing's so wet that it's getting sticky or muddy, and that's a good thing too. So I think for now we'll just continue on as is. Got to remember also that we're covering up with a pretty good sized piece of plastic here that allows for very little evaporation or drying. So you let it go one way in terms of it getting too damp, and then correcting that later is a little bit tricky. But for now, we're feeling like moisture's about right and we would not want it to get much drier. I think we're still good for coverings here with this bubble wrap, so we're going to stick to everything just the way it is here for now. At some point in the future we might decide to cover with something else, but for now I think we're in good shape. So let's get the other bin out here. Alright, so not only is it thought that this system has more worms in it, so like I said, an estimated population in here of over 1,200. We've also definitely got more material in this thing. It's heavier, it comes up higher to the rim, So it's it's definitely a different setup with what appears to be a greater number of worms, making it probably a much more capable bin. A lot more space in here too, which might mean that, over the few weeks it's been in service, it might already be promoting a lot of reproduction of the worms, just because maybe they're sensing the space. And I gotta tell you, all these fresh castings on the top surface, and there's a whole bunch of them all over the plastic covering as well. There is a lot of freshly deposited casting material here. It's pretty incredible. Can't believe how much. I mean, it's like you gotta actually dig down a while before you finally start hitting something that resembles bedding or whatever might have been the top surface here. Wow. Lots and lots of castings piling up in here, and piling up quick. I guess that's the payoff for giving them a lot of room to roam. They just gobble it all up. So let's get this feeding zone indicator out of our way. This little guy's funny though. He's kind of stuck because he squirmed through one of the little holes in the material. Now he wants to get free. Come on. There we go. Dive down, buddy. Man, such nice material in here. So let's give it the same treatment. It's going to get similar feeding, probably a little bit bigger in terms of the amount. Not by much though. I would say half a handful tops in terms of how much more this bin's getting than the other one. Same amount of bedding in terms of that newspaper that I allocated here. It looks like we must have been pretty generous with bedding last time too, or something. I don't know. It just seems like there's so much stuff, floating around. I could tell it's a lot of castings, but I could tell there's a lot of stuff mingled in with it too. And so many worms. Really heavily populated system, gotta say. So these are the ones that I referred to earlier as my original worms, and for anyone who's not a regular on my channel, they're really the only bunch of worms that I currently have in my population that I could trace back to my very first ever bin. And I had a really bad die-off at one point, at which point I thought I lost all of the worms that I could trace back that way to my very first batch. And then I did manage to locate a small sample of that population and nurse them back to health, and what lives in this container here is the rebounded population from what might have at some point been so small that you could have counted it in just a couple dozen, and that would have accounted for all the worms there. It also almost looks to me like, and I never really pay that much close attention to the stems of grapes. I mean, for that matter, I don't even really include them in my worm bins usually. But it is interesting to see how the main stem is starting to become a little bit fibrous almost. So they're working it down. That's pretty neat. And this is just going to be like leftover cardboard, paper, bedding type materials from the original build of the bin, or maybe we decided to go with large chunk pieces of bedding last time too. I don't remember. But in these newer bins, ones like this, or ones like both of these, I guess, they're still both young enough that I think I could put stuff in here that's going to take a while to break down, because I know that we're going to be in service here for some time. I tell you, if you had to throw a number out there for how many worms you think this system has in it, just based on what we've seen so far, I just wonder how many people would come up with a number that's comparable to what our original guesstimate is. Because I see so many worms everywhere, and so many of them are tiny baby worms. It kind of makes me wonder if we might have just had sort of a breeding frenzy in here right from the start. Because, man, lots and lots of worms in here. All right, I think we've got ourselves a pretty good sized hole, and I guess we'll bring down this piece of leftover. I can't really recall, other than these few chunks of cardboard, even though I thought we had some leftover avocado in here too. I didn't really bump into it, but maybe as we cover up and maybe as we probe through the rest of the system a little bit, maybe we'll bump into it. But if not, it's not a big deal. Let's do the same thing here. Let's be Mr. Generous with the bedding, because I got a feeling that the worm population this size is going to appreciate it, and they're probably going to do away with it pretty quickly as well. I think if you give them like a tougher bedding, like leaves or something like that, it might take a little bit longer. especially the leaf stems and the tougher parts of the material, but all this paper is just wood pulp, basically. So I would imagine once it's dampened, it probably takes virtually no effort for the worms to nibble away at that. So let's see. Let's go ahead and drop in their food. Same as before. Half of that cucumber or Kirby or whatever the thing is called. It's not the full-size cucumber. A lot of time these are sold like in a little tray with multiple ones, and they're a little bit smaller. I think that's what they're called, but I'm not sure. So this appears to be like the two butt ends of two heads of lettuce, so I don't know if the other system got that. Now that I'm kind of spreading the food out in here, it doesn't seem like we really gave these guys all that much more than the other system got. It seems like a fairly comparable feeding, and this bin somehow seems to me like a system that could probably do away with a good bit of food, probably even more than this, but you know, for now, why don't we just stick with what we've got. Divvying up the portions somewhat evenly. Maybe if we are more careful next time, we'll succeed in portioning out a little extra for this system when we feed these two together again next time, because it does seem like this system might be a little bit more capable. But for now, I think we'll be okay. And I like the fact that we sort of are going with shorter periods of time between the feedings. A lot of my bins lately, it seems like I've been going multiple weeks or longer before, you know, getting back into a system to feed it. And here, after 9 days, feels like a pretty good interval. So I like the idea of keeping these little guys busy. I saw not even one little tiny shred or piece of any of that celery that we gave them last time. So 9 days for eating up a bunch of celery, and I guess it is probably a fairly fast food, but I do remember in the past at least coming back into systems that I had fed celery to and finding lots of little strands, the individual fibers within each piece of celery. But maybe that was, you know, a different time, a different place, a different batch of worms, less capable system, who knows. Man, look at all this bedding material down here. Some of it's all just kind of clumped together. I didn't realize there was so much of it down here. It was kind of just like just kind of basking in the joy of seeing so many castings in here that I didn't realize how much bedding material is still in here. But I do remember commenting on it last time when we kind of cruised around the bin and explored different stuff. There's probably a pretty good benefit to blending all this bedding in with the surrounding material. It makes a lot more of it, I believe, accessible directly by worms that are just cruising through the material. They could just, you know, have at any of that material, as opposed to a whole, you know, huge pile of it just sitting there unapproachable, or at least approachable from the outer surface perspective, but none of the material that's caught up in the middle of the big bundle gets any action. So kind of makes me wonder if we should just do a slightly deeper probe into this other side. I don't remember us doing quite as much breakup of bedding materials. Maybe we didn't excavate quite as much, so it feels like the right thing to do, just to make sure we're blending in a lot of this abundant quantity of bedding material in, so that it can all get worked, all get approached by the worms, all get eaten. So yeah, there's lots and lots of bedding in here, tons of it. A very productive system, though, I could tell. This system is just cranking out castings, considering how young it is. 59 days, you know, I mean, geez, it's only a couple months old. And boy, does it have a lot of casting. So here's an avocado pit. So we must have cruised right by the avocado, the leftover avocado that I made a reference to earlier. Actually, I think I did bump into its shell earlier, but I was sort of just stirring and mixing and checking other things out too, and I might have just glossed right past it. But either way, I think we're pretty much done here. Sometimes I just can't seem to resist spending a little bit more time poking around, checking out stuff. I'm just trying to remember now, after we put the food in, did we put any grit on top of it? Let's take a quick peek down in here. Somehow I don't recall doing so. So, to me it just feels like maybe it's not too late to do so, especially since this is among my younger bins. Only a couple months old. only getting its now 5th feeding this time, I don't see any harm in making sure that the grit has been applied with the feeding. I'm pretty sure we took care of giving it to them in the other bin too. Hopefully we did. Hopefully I'm not that scatterbrained. But sometimes I am, so that's why I'm always watching, making sure I'm keeping myself honest. Alright, let's get the feeding zone indicator back on here to show where we last applied this feeding of yummy lettuce and a pretty good generous dose of bedding in terms of just those newspaper crumpled up chunks that were placed down in there, not to mention all that nice bedding that we just freed up from being in big masses and chunks and clumps. All that stuff now blended in with the material at large should make for some really nice stuff that the worms are going to hopefully take good advantage of. But that brings us to the end of our video, and I've got a few things I got to take care of, cleaning off and putting things away. But I'm not going to waste your time with that. That's boring. Before I go though, let me really quickly say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. Alright everyone, have a great day. Take care.